Hi everyone, good Erev Shabbos. It's Erev Shabbos Vayakal Pekude. We'll be finishing the book of Shemot. It's also Shabbos hachodesh. We'll be reading the selection from chapter 12, Perek Yud Beit of Shemot, which lays out the instructions for declaring the Rosh Chodesh, the first new moon, that of Nisan, and preparing for the night prior to the Exodus, the eating of the Passover offering, the Korban Pesach, and all that goes along with it, along with the plague of the firstborn. That's our Torah reading. And I want us to think about, as we'll spend a little time in the text, but I want to have us open with recognizing the use of terms that have been made use of these past a number of weeks, and they each have their own meaning. Sometimes they're used interchangeably, probably because of lack of accuracy. Some of them are legal directives, and sometimes just as sage counsel. Here are the terms: quarantine, isolation, and shelter at home. Those are the three terms that we've been hearing, I'm sure. And each of these has a place in the Torah. Quarantine and isolation are the things that we do to help protect other people from some form, it seems, of a contagion that you might be carrying. We know there are people, many of us have been quarantined because we were exposed to someone who was a carrier of the coronavirus, directly or secondarily in school. Our kids went to schools with someone who tested positive. So there's a quarantine that's placed upon everyone surrounding that person, and that person's in an isolation, at least supposed to be, which means that the person in isolation, everyone has to stay away from, is in the house. People who are in quarantine, others stay away from them, even though they aren't necessarily carrying the symptoms. And that's what we've been paying attention to, of course, these instructions about isolation and quarantine over these past number of weeks, and we're well aware of that. And perhaps the Torah sets that in place, perhaps most famously, if we understand, depending on how we understand this, around the Mitzorah. The Torah says in the Mitzorah that firstly he has to walk around and say, Tameh, Tameh, I'm Tameh, which is a signal to other people to stay away from him. It's like being in the grocery store right now. I was in the grocery store this morning. People were keeping their 6 feet distance generally, gloves, no gloves, masks. It was such a bizarre reality to be in. And then in isolation, excuse me, in isolation, which was put into place, where he is told, badad yeshev michutz l'machane moshavo, he's got to be alone outside of the encampment. If it's, and that's perhaps because of the contagion factor. Although Kohen would go to him, depending how we understand that, I fully comprehend. But I think the simplest read is that's what you have here. And we're well aware of the isolations that are happening now, isolations that happened in the past, the height of other plagues, bubonic plague, and all the other cases of pandemics that we are perhaps learning more about, where people were indeed put in isolation. This morning, or Shabbat morning, we will read not about a quarantine and not about an isolation, but a shelter in place, a shelter at home. Here's what we read in the text. After God describes how we're supposed to eat the Korban Pesach on the ready to leave, God says, I will pass. Va'avarti be'eretz Mitzrayim b'layla, as God says, I'm going to pass through Egypt. And God says he will strike all the firstborns from humans to animals, carry out wonders against the gods of Egypt. God alone, Midrash, we know that in the Haggadah, Ani, Hashem, Allah Shaliach, God alone, not an angel, not a messenger, God alone. And then he says, and that blood should be as a sign on the door, on the houses where you are stationed. And I'll see the blood, and I will pass over you. And there won't be a plague against you to destroy, as I strike in the land of Egypt. So when you read this text, it's hard to understand. It's not hard to understand at all, actually. The simple meaning is God's going through all of Egypt, Identifying where firstborns Egyptians are is God will firstborns are is what God will be doing. Jews need to clarify we're a Jewish home. Don't worry about us. Don't strike our firstborns here. That's how one could read this text, and it'll be perfectly clear that the mashchit, then God would not be destroying as he brings plagues against the rest of Egypt. Yet, as we read the instructions that Moshe gives later on, you should take the hyssop branch and as a brush and you put the blood on the doorpost. Then he adds a new instruction that didn't appear earlier. Ve'atem lo tetz'u ish mi petach beito ad boker. As for you, no person should leave through the portal of his house until morning, and God will pass to plague Egypt. He'll see the blood on the doorpost on the two mezuzot, and he'll pass over, right? And then it concludes, Lo yitain ha'mashchit lavo al patechem lingof, and he won't allow the mashchit. Now it's sort of a defining entity called the mashchit, the destroyer. God will not allow the mashchit into your houses to plague you. The mashchit, as commentaries note, is not God. Ramban tries to spell this out very clearly as he reads the Rashi and others. God is the one passing through Egypt. That's the midrash we said, only God. But along with God, there is a mashchit. There is a force, whether it's the part of God's entourage, his bouncer, his tough guys who are in front of him. Is that what it means? Or possibly it means the natural dangers that are out there. God says, you stay in your house, I promise you they're not coming into your house. That's God's promise in this case. But if you cross the threshold, you go outside at night and think that you won't be susceptible to the usual dangers. That's the wrong attitude. You are mistaken. And the usual dangers will still be there. Perhaps the unusual dangers might even be there. Stay in your houses so you don't expose yourself to that. That's what God says. Shelter in place. Yeah, so that's what we're experiencing, right? We're experiencing whether it's actually a legal imperative right now or a strong advice. Shelter in place. Don't go out amongst people so that you won't be exposed to dangers which are there, which are very much there. That's what we're living in. We're quite frightened by that, and we have to gather ourselves to not allow ourselves to fall into the frightfulness of it all, and just to move forward and God willing to be able to control this by actually staying away from one another to help ensure that we can be safe and healthy going forward. So that's what we have, right? The homes simply are a bunker, but it's not. It's not just a place where you're hiding from the danger that's outside. And God gives instructions. What should your home be like? Oh, your home should be a beautiful place. It should perhaps even be filled with the joy of the excitement of leaving Mitzrayim. That in that period of time that was there. They were going out to freedom the next day. But significantly, what they were doing was sitting in their homes, engaging in a mitzvah, thinking about and experiencing the power of God's command, rejecting idolatry, affirming God, and doing so as a family. That's the mitzvah. The mitzvah was to eat it by household. Perhaps you would have a neighbor who would join you. We can't do the neighbor thing right now, although you can open your door and share good wishes across the portals of each one's doorway. But it's a chance, if you are blessed to have people with you, to be together in a family with you, to create something very special, to work on something that is meant to be special. With all the challenges, and if you were on the call last night with some of our wonderful members who are in the mental health field, counselors and the like, you had a chance to talk about some of the challenges, about all this time together, Shalom Bayit, which is hard, not so simple. I remember years ago, Rabbi Riskin and his wife were, actually I was often at Ben Bayit in their home, and he told the story, I actually witnessed it, where maybe she told me the story that kids would be screaming and hollering and yelling, and he would look at his watch and say, "Oh, I have to go to shul," and he would stand at the door and say, "Shalom bayit." That's not the type of shalom bayit we mean here. Shalom bayit means trying to create the peace in the house, a holy peace in the house, and indeed a kedusha to one's home through the learning that you're doing, through the important conversations that you have, and the relationships that sometimes are frayed. Take extra breaths and pause and recognize all that's happening, and turn towards one another and see that we have a chance to actually strengthen the bonds that we have of parent and child, husband and wife, siblings. If it's with grandparents, with so many others, that's the opportunity here. So, as Shabbat hachodesh will descend upon us in a few hours, take the extra time to ponder and to feel what a Shabbat can mean. Shabbat together, and to create something that we can create or strengthen that which we are able to strengthen, the bonds between each other, which bonds within ourselves and the bonds with God too. But let's feel the blessing of the sheltering at home by making the home indeed the sheltering place for all that is good and all that is beautiful, the love and the affection and the holiness that we can bring into our homes. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom.